Attention and warm up the room for Brian Coleman.
So I'm just talking. My name is Brian Coleman. I'm from Boston. I was happy to drive down here. I've always loved Philadelphia. I have family outside the area, so I was actually hanging with them last night. I went to high school in central New Jersey. I come here all the time. Back before you guys were probably born, but that's all right. I'm okay with it. So I do a lot of different things. I wear a lot of different hats, even though I don't wear hats, but metaphorically speaking. I have a PR company called Good Road up in Boston that I started a couple years ago just on my own after I'd worked for a couple different companies over the years. I've always done PR kind of as a baseline for everything I do, and there are a lot of different branches to the different things I do on any given day, which I think any entrepreneur can kind of relate to. There's very rarely one straight path to certainly any given week and definitely any given day. And I think that's important too, to be able to have that financially, but also kind of mentally multitasking and being able to adapt quickly on the go, depending on what comes at you. So I also have written a couple books over the years, and I will actually, I think one of them, I have a bunch of them, so I'll be giving them to each of you if you are interested.
Thank you.
You're welcome, class. So this is the most recent one I did. It's called Check the Technique Volume 2. And this was the first one I did. And there's definitely been a progression, thankfully, as should always happen. These two are actually self-published. So this one came out on Random House, kind of sandwiched in between. And so I've kind of had experience both in the publishing perspective, putting out books on my own and putting it out through pretty much the biggest publisher in the world. And so I've had good experiences and tough experiences with both, and I definitely chose on purpose to self-publish the last one, even though I probably could have had it on another house. Over the years, I've definitely come to strongly believe that owning your own work is hugely important, and that doesn't really matter what enterprise you're in. If someone is going to take a piece of what you're doing, and I think this certainly will apply to you, probably has applied to you already, and I'm sure will apply to you in the future. If someone is going to take a piece of your hard work and what you're doing, what are you getting back from it? Sometimes it's possible that you'll get back a lot, and sometimes it's possible you'll get very little. So you have to kind of weigh the options at all times with this kind of stuff. And I think this is, my entrepreneurial endeavors over the years have been many, but they've been very kind of small scale, and when you really compare it to larger companies and even other entrepreneurs doing kind of small business type things. But my goal has always been just to kind of follow my heart, because I think that's the other key thing, that if you do things just for the money, or you do it because you think this will lead to some kind of fame, but your heart's not really in it, and this is kind of common sense, but I think that people need to be reminded of this pretty much constantly, that there are so many things that I'm sure all of you are incredibly passionate about, that you don't have to settle for doing something that you're not passionate about. You can find something that is a great idea that can hopefully sustain whatever it is, whether it's your entire life, entire paycheck, or just a small sliver of it, and still be passionate about it. Because if you're not passionate about something, no matter what, unless you're a really good BS artist, and I am a publicist, so I can, I'm not really a very good BS artist as a publicist, and some people might think that that's weird, but I kind of, I work also with the PR stuff I do. I work very from passion and from things I believe in versus things I just know will pay the rent. That also does make, sometimes you make sacrifices that don't make you as much money, but in the end, over time, I've been doing the PR thing for yikes, 26, 27 years now, and it's been great. It's been really interesting. I've worked with some incredible people. With the books, I've met some amazing artists. I mean, the thing about the books, and I can talk a little bit about the journalism part of it, because being a freelance journalist is also an entrepreneurial enterprise, of course. Pretty much almost anything you do is an entrepreneurial enterprise, as you guys know, and that's the beauty of it. So it's kind of figuring out within whatever ecosystem you want to exist in, how you can kind of help. So I've said it before, in the 90s I was doing a radio show up in Boston, college radio, working with a lot of artists as they were putting out their first music, things like on the Raucous label, like Mustaf and Talib, and Company Flow, things on Definitive Jux, things like that, and kind of seeing them actually kind of almost hatch and become this amazing force. And you know, I've always considered that artist to be inspirational to me, but thankfully I never wanted to be an artist because it would have been a disaster. So I kind of figured out within that ecosystem, how could I help? How could I make an impact and in a natural way, in a passionate way? And I said, I'm going to be a cheerleader. So I'm going to do my radio show, I'm going to be a journalist, and I'm going to do this. And eventually it led to the books. So basically it's kind of assessing. What I've always done in my career is looking at the field, looking at what's out there, and saying what exists already, and where are there kind of holes in there, where are there opportunities, and is that something that I could could I do that with my passion, my skills, my networks, etc.? Is that something I can do? And so then I try and gravitate towards those. Not necessarily with a full plan, because I think it's in the same way that if you're going to college and your first 2 months freshman year and you think you know what you're going to major in, like, that's generally not a good idea, because chances are that's not the way it's going to happen. So you have to be ready to adapt at all times. You have to be ready to look at what's in front of you and find the opportunities and see if you can jump on those opportunities, if those match up, you know, with you, and if not, maybe only part of it does. So you say, you know what, my friend would be really good for this too, so maybe we'll team up, and then we'll kind of, there's a hole and I can only fill part of it, but me and my friend, we can fill the whole thing. So you do this, you book the groups, and I'll promote the groups, and you know, you can produce, and etc. So I think that's really important. I'll give you one example. When I started writing in the mid to late 90s, I started at XXL magazine. That is a very different thing now than it was back in the late 90s. In the late 90s, it was pretty powerful. It was, the Source was kind of waning. They weren't in there. It wasn't the strongest time for the Source. They still had good stuff going on, but XXL saw an opportunity. They said, we can present hip hop and have kind of incredible photography. That was really what XXL was about. It was like making this powerful photography a big part of it. So it wasn't like the photographs weren't necessarily like an afterthought. It was kind of like, this is going to be as important as the words on this page, that have these artists and kind of present them as powerful and regal and things like that. And it really had a pretty big impact when it first came out. So my thing was, at the time, it was when, you know, Rockefeller and Bad Boy were kind of ruling, and I had no real interest in the stuff that was kind of popular. I was more interested in the underground. And most of the writers who were clamoring to try and get assignments at XXL, I'm sure wanted to write the big cover stories on, you know, Puffy and Mace and all that stuff. And I said, you know what, like, I'll take all the DJ stuff, I'll take all the indie underground stuff, and then they just started throwing it at me because no one else really wanted to do it, but that was my main passion. So it worked out perfectly. It's possible at the time that there might have been someone else who also might have been there, and they might have started sharing it or said, no, we're already good. But at that time, I was ready. So the opportunity didn't even present itself to me. I looked at it and I said, you know, I see an opportunity here, and I can do this, and honestly, I'd rather do this. So this is a win-win for everybody. And so I was with XXL Magazine for a long time, 5, 6, 7 years, pretty much from the first issue, maybe the second. And I did a column called Classic Material, which is actually kind of how this whole book thing started, where I would interview an old school artists who weren't even that old school at the time. This is going back 15, 20 years, and talking to them, which yet again was not something that generally a lot of the younger writers were that psyched about. They wanted to talk with who was hot now and all that stuff. So it worked out for me. I got a lot of good assignments, and I talked to some incredible people who I've always been a huge fan of and idolized. So, I mean, I guess that's one good example of at least for me personally. And I think that overall, I mean, when I was jotting down notes about the talk here today, I think that overall, my main advice, and I'd love to hear if people have questions, is or comments on it, is there's so many different places you can find inspiration, and you have to be inspired by as many things as possible, and you have to study history and study how people have done things in the past. And I think most importantly, you have to study very, very often, at least in my own career, the inspiration that I have for a certain thing has not been a direct inspiration. So with the books, I was actually inspired by hip-hop artists more than I was by other writers. So I said, for example, one of my favorite artists of all time, who I've actually sat right here on this stage interviewing, Schoolie D from Philly, he was making music in the early to mid-'80s, and people were basically telling him, you can't do that. Like you can't swear like that. You can't talk about what you're talking about in these rhymes. And he was just like, F that. Yes, I can. And so, but no one was knocking down his door to give him a record deal. So he started his own label, and he had no idea what he was doing, and he just kind of figured it out as he went along. And I think that, so for me, putting out a book, or whether you're starting a company or a food truck or any kind of enterprise, you can take inspiration from anywhere. It can be from an artist, it can be from a painter, or it can be from a chef, or it can be literally from anywhere. And so you kind of figure out, at least me personally, I have a pretty wide range of things that I'm interested in. And so I generally try and use people who I consider to be innovators. And it doesn't necessarily mean innovators even on a grand scheme. Like, I like people who innovate even just within a certain scene or a certain city or something like that. So I mentioned Schoolie D. I mean, another artist who, I don't know if you guys are that familiar with, but Sun Ra. I'm a big jazz fan. Sun Ra, most of his entire career was he was in Germantown. They basically had a commune, a cult, or they were a unit. It wasn't show up here and we'll practice once a week. It's Tuesday at 3 a.m. Wake up, we're going to practice. And so. But Sun Ra was inspirational to me. That's okay. So Sun Ra was like inspirational to me because he knew very well how to play straight ahead jazz. He could play straight ahead jazz if he wanted to. He just had no interest in that. That was actually kind of boring to him. So it was more like, how can I paint way outside of the lines, and how can I kind of change this music that I love? And so to me, yet again, that I can't play piano at all, and I wouldn't really try to. It's too late for me at this point, I think, to try and learn. But his inspiration, to me, he also had his own label that he would put out his own records. They would tour in very kind of unconventional venues all around the country. So I'm a big music fan, so a lot of my inspiration comes from music, but it doesn't necessarily translate directly into what I do. And I think that's kind of important, is to not kind of do apples to apples all the time. When you're thinking about an idea and what inspires you, you can think about, maybe you're really into architecture, so you think about different architects and how they've changed cities and changed the world with the ways that they looked at buildings. and parts of town and whole neighborhoods and things like that. So, like 6th Street, is amazing. Some of the architecture and all the stuff on the buildings is pretty amazing to see. So, so I guess that's kind of my basic take on it. If there's things that I've learned that I could kind of impart, is to always just be wide open for inspiration and never shut something off. I mean, if you're passionate about it, find ways to synthesize what these people did to change the world, and see if you can kind of take even just a little bit of that inspiration and mold it into something that could actually benefit what you want to do. Because very, very few, if any, people who are entrepreneurs, innovators, really knew what the hell they were doing when they began. They figured it out almost exclusively as they went along. And the key really, I think, and we're going to talk to Joe the Butcher Nicolo later, who is an essential musical force in the city of Philadelphia and nationwide in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, is to kind of figure out, like, inspiration and opportunities can happen to you anytime. They could happen to you today at 2 o'clock, and are you ready to pivot? Are you ready to jump on it? And I guess even before you're ready to pivot or jump on it, you first have to assess it and say, is this something for me? Maybe it's not. I mean, but sometimes if you're at an event, at a party, and you meet someone, you might have 30 seconds to kind of talk to them, to get their attention. And maybe it's someone that you don't really want to mess with, or you don't think would really help you. And honestly, if that's the case, you're probably going to come off corny, and they're just going to be like, okay, yeah. But if you decide very quickly that this is a person that I admire, that I think I could learn from, and that I think maybe, who knows, could even be an investor in what I want to do down the line, then you have to be ready. You have to be ready at all times, because you never, ever know. And if you think you know, basically, if you plan things out, it's good to plan. But it's I think generally a mistake to assume that your plan is going to work out the way you think it's going to work out. So you have to be ready for both. You can't just wing it your whole life. That's not good advice, because I haven't winged it my whole life. But at the same time, you just have to be ready when opportunities are there. As I was saying, first assess it, but you have to assess it quickly. It's not there. Whatever. There's Russell Simmons. So what would I say to Russell Simmons? And should I even go up to him, or blah, blah, blah. But you have to make that decision in 15 seconds, because he might be walking through, and so sometimes you just have to be strong about it. You just have to even be a little bit maybe overbearing. There's a fine line for sure. So for example, I'll give you a very much lower level example, but for me it was big. There's a writer named David Ritz who's written, he's kind of the legend when it comes to as told to books with music. He's worked with Ray Charles and Willie Nelson, like very just huge people. He did Marvin Gaye's kind of as told to. And so he was at a conference recently, and I was on the same conference on a much lower level as he was. But he's kind of like, to me, that's where I would love to be. Like he's kind of at the top of the game. And he was sitting with a bunch of people, like 4 or 5 people, and I kind of just walked over, and I didn't like push them out of the way, but I was just like, hey, I kind of like lunged a little bit and said, I'm a huge fan, and I would feel bad if I didn't walk up and just say that I really admire you. And then he said, come on, sit down, like sit down, tell me about yourself. And by the end of the conversation, he's a very kind person, and he was like, I'm going to introduce you to my agent. And like I've never actually had a lot of use for literary agents. I've never really dealt with them. But he was like, I'll call him tomorrow and tell him that you're great. And I was like, but you haven't even read my stuff. So are you sure about that? Like, don't get yourself in trouble here. But, and that's not going to change my life and all of a sudden I'm going to be a millionaire. But it's like a lot of times you have to just see these opportunities and say, all right, so it might be a little rude of me to do what I'm about to do, but whatever, I'm going to regret it if I don't do it. So I've had other instances where it hasn't gone quite as well. But usually that was when I was much younger and maybe at a club and maybe had a little bit to drink, and so that didn't. So be careful about that too. You know, don't just be at the club just having fun. Like, be ready, because you never know when an opportunity is going to present itself, and you're never going to know how you're going to react to it. But the more you prepare, and the more you prepare, the more that you have self-confidence that your ideas are good, and you can't always wait for people externally to tell you that your ideas are good. The dedication in my Check the Technique Volume 1 is basically like, this is for all these artists who never raised their hand and asked for permission. And that's kind of the way that, like, I think if you could sum up what inspires me is people who don't wait, because I'll go back to School ED. Like, he told me, and he's told other people, that he had a meeting with Lady B, who was like the huge, she could make or break your career in a certain way in Philly in the 80s. She was big on the radio. And she just said, you have to change your style. Like, this is offensive. Like, you can't do this, and you can't swear like that, and you can't talk about, drugs and your friends selling drugs and stuff like that. And so, if you've ever met Schoolie, he's maybe the most self-confident person in the entire East Coast, if not country. But that's incredible, because he backs it up with what he's done with his talent. And so if he had been less sure of himself, he might have said, oh, yeah, maybe I should do some more kind of pop type stuff and I should stop swearing. But I mean, he put out his own records. They sold incredibly well. And then all of a sudden Jive Records called him and offered him a contract, and he recorded with Jive for several, and so, but he kind of dealt with them on his own terms. He didn't deal with them like, oh, please, Jive, sign me. It was more like, you need me, So that's kind of going back to owning your own work. It's okay, in my opinion, in my experience, to give up some ownership or control, but if you do so, protect yourself. Don't just say, whenever you're looking into someone who's going to finance something you want to do or collaborate with you, think worst case scenario. Okay, what if this person just stops returning my calls, and they say they're going to pay, but then they file personal bankruptcy and they have no money. So where do my rights to my own work? I mean, the most tragic thing is when you've made something incredible, and this happens to authors, certainly musicians all the time, is that, oh, this is great, like I just got signed and all my troubles are over. And it's like a lot of times they're just beginning, because you could tell stories of, and this goes back decades and decades, of I record this amazing album, but then the company goes bankrupt, or they decide they don't like it and they shelve it, and so I have this great record, but no one's ever going to hear it, and 30 years later it hasn't come out. And so was that $50,000, $100,000 advance that you got, was that worth it? So you always have to kind of think of yourself and think, I think, worst case scenario, and hopefully it won't get to worst case scenario, but in my experience, I would say worst case scenario happens in some respect 50% of the time. So it protect yourself at all costs, and you don't have to predict. It's basically, when I am faced with an opportunity, if someone does want to kind of partner with me or do something, it's more like, okay, what are you doing for me, and how can I assess what you're doing for me along the line? So what are the kind of mileposts where I can assess if you're actually doing what you say you're going to do? Because a lot of people, as I think many of you will figure out down the line, is when they have money and power, they kind of look at it from a percentage basis. Like, okay, so I'm going to probably do 10 of these, and I'll screw over maybe 40% of them, and maybe 2 of those people will sue me, but the rest will just kind of slither away. And and it's like, sometimes that happens. That's a reality in the world. So the more you can build your own equity, your own ownership, and honestly, that I think it's tied into your kind of your worth. as a person, but also your worth as a business person and as someone who has ideas. So there are all kinds of things like this, like that. Even that movie that I don't know if you guys saw it, Joy. You know, like I watched it, and like parts of it were corny, of course, but it's kind of interesting. It's someone like she just believed in that idea, and people said that's crazy. And there's hundreds and hundreds of these ideas all throughout history, and so learn from them. And also, I think too, learn from you guys. I know over the next 9 months are going to be exposed to some incredible stories and some incredible people and histories that you're going to learn from. But entrepreneurship can happen on many, many levels, and they can be kind of micro, even within the same idea. There can be stages of entrepreneurial work and ideas within that. So sometimes you're going to do that on your own. Sometimes you say, you know what, that's not my forte. Let me call my friend. Maybe your friend that's your neighbor, or maybe it's someone who's an old professor of yours, or someone you knew, 5 years ago, moved out to California. But just be aware of where inspiration can come from, but also where knowledge and expertise can come from. Because sometimes you can actually hire that person to do the work, but you could also just pick their brain, take them out to lunch and ask them, I just want to know, how does this work? And I think a lot of people, and I think you guys will find, I know there's a lot of great mentors that you have lined up within the network here, that people who succeed, and people who succeed kind of building something from nothing, really like generally to help other people do the same thing. Because you're not going to knock them off their perch, most likely, but the more small businesses and entrepreneurs there are in the world, the better a place it is. As we know on a daily basis, that corporations are not really generally helping people. So the world is made up of a lot of small businesses and small ideas that kind of generally aggregate into really amazing things, whether that's within a city, a neighborhood, a community, or even the East Coast or America or whatever. So anyways, I'm kind of going different directions, but I guess I just wanted to give you a little bit of an example about how I look at entrepreneurship. And I think I generally look at it from a more artistic way, I guess, because I will be very honest in that I've never made tons of money as an entrepreneur, but that was never my goal. My goal is always to collaborate with good people, with smart people, to have great conversations, to learn things from other people, and follow my passion. Because at any point, I think, in our lives, you can choose to sell out or choose to do something that may be the easier choice, or go work for, I've worked for large companies, and I've worked for companies that's just 2 people. So there are good and bad things about both. But I think in the end, you have to have the passion for it, because if you're not passionate about your idea, then there's just no way, because there's going to be rough seas ahead. No matter what you do, there's no possible way that every step along the way is going to be like, oh, that was amazing, wow, that was great. So there's going to be a lot of struggle. But if you have the passion and you have self-confidence, then you're going to be able to weather those storms. And at some point, you may have to say, proverbially, yeah, I'm going to have to cut bait. Like this just didn't work. Like I thought this was a good idea, but maybe I can shift it into something else, or maybe I'll put this on the back burner because maybe the time is not right. Maybe in 3 or 4 years, the world might kind of catch up with what I want to do, and things might come back. So you have to know that you have to believe in yourself and believe in your idea, because there are going to be a lot of times along the way that people aren't going to believe. They're not going to be with you, and they're not going to be there with their hand around your shoulder. And you have to be ready for that. And I think at the end that if you're holding on to an idea that you don't have passion about, and people are kind of swatting your idea around and kind of being negative about it, it's much harder to weather that storm.
How do you balance all your ventures that you have?
Yeah, I think that's really one of the keys. If you're a small business person or entrepreneur, you have to kind of figure out two things, I think. How you're able to sustain on a baseline level, pay your rent, and pay the phone bill and everything. So for me, that's publicity. Like I've always at least been able to do that. And we could talk a little bit more about what publicity is if you guys have never really done that directly on your own too. But we can do that in a second. But so for me, it's always been the way that the books, if I make money on the books, that's great. But it's not like if I'm not making money on them in any given month that, oh man, like how am I going to pay the electric bill? Like because it's like I have enough going on with kind of some of the PR stuff and consulting that I do that I can make that work. But I think generally, I mean, that is the trick, is that the life that I think you guys are trying to choose here is going to be about being very creative, both in your business ideas, but also in how you're going to kind of sustain a baseline of kind of just living, and then with the free time, hopefully, to be able to kind of create these ideas and do, because generally someone's not just going to hand you like $1 million and be like, you know what, just, yeah, that's cool, like just let me know how it's going in like 3 years. That's not happening. So I hate to be, the sour note here, that's not happening. So, but you can do it. Like people have done it for forever. They've figured out ways to be small business people, and sometimes they have to have. Sometimes you do have to have like a corporate day gig to kind of sustain it, or whether that's a part-time thing or sometimes a full-time thing, and then you have to basically get 4 hours of sleep a night. You get home and you have a quick meal, and then you jump on your actual passion. So for me, publicity has been something. So basically, publicity, in basic terms, I've always considered PR, media relations, they're basically the same thing, to be kind of matchmaking. So you have the press, the media, so now that includes blogs. When I started, the blogs did not exist. But television stations, magazines, anywhere that are kind of gatekeepers to between you and the information you have and getting it out to the public. The good thing is now, and I don't deal with this as much, is that you can kind of be your own PR machine just with social media. So you can kind of cut out, if you can find a way to build an audience, you can figure out a way to cut out the media, at least for the most part, which is kind of a beautiful thing that didn't exist several years ago. It was hard to talk directly to your potential fans or customers or whatever. Still though, it is good to work within the traditional media too. So, but what I mean by matchmaker is writers and editors at, say, the Philly Inquirer, they have to put out a newspaper every day. So clearly, there's plenty of news out there, some of it good and some not so good, that's just going to happen. So that's kind of the news part of it. But when it comes to business and arts, and I focus mostly in arts, they have a lot of choices. They don't have to cover anything, really. Like, they can cover whatever the hell they want. Chances are they're going to cover, in general, what's most popular. If you have a choice of covering Beyonce or the hot new person who's going to be big in 6 months, you're probably going to just do another story on Beyonce because that's a safe bet. So that being said, what the matchmaking part is they have a need to put out, whether it's daily, hourly, like blogs now obviously are updated constantly, to get them content that they think their readers will want to check out, or their listeners or viewers of their TV station. So you have to, and the trick is you can't take certain things personally, and you can't be too self-centered about it. So you have to say, not just, so for example, if people hire me to do PR and they want to get like all these huge news stories, I can't just think like, I have to get this, and stupid Inquirer, you better write about this, and like, or I'm going to just send you 5-10 emails a day. Like, that's not how it works. You have to kind of politely but persistently kind of send them information to say, I think your readers will be interested in this. I saw you did this piece last month on this company. These guys have a great idea and they're doing that. Sometimes that means that they're not going to write about it right away, but if you're polite about it and you keep in contact, and eventually something will hopefully happen if it's newsworthy. And chances are, if you took the project on, unless you're just doing it for the money, it is newsworthy. So the key is not to take it personally, and it's especially tough because I am also the publicist for my books. So because it'd be kind of stupid for me to pay someone to promote my books when I'm a publicist. So, but that also kind of opens you up, going back to believing in what you're doing and kind of self-confidence. Sometimes, someone could say that book sucks. God, what a crappy book. And if that's someone else, if that's your client, then it's like, oh, okay. But if it's you, you could just curl up in a ball and be like, oh my God, what am I doing? And everything's falling apart. So it's basically keeping in touch with people, but also finding out who these writers and editors are. So just calling up generally some publication and without doing any research is just never going to work for you generally. So you have to kind of look, and now that you can look online and you can say, look at these different articles in the arts section, business and lifestyle and everything, and say, okay, I'm noticing this woman's name, like she's really doing she seems to really care about up and coming companies, and she seems to have an outlook that I agree with, and I really like that. So then that should be the person that you kind of start keeping in touch with along with others. I mean, the thing I generally say to clients when they come to me is what do you read? What do you look at? Tell me, and even if you're making some kind of scientific thing, but you're like, I read whatever, I read something that's totally unrelated to that field, because that generally tells me kind of what kind of publication you should be in, at least to start, because you can always branch out. And the other final thing I would say with it is, you almost have to start small. If you're brand new, don't expect that you're going to get a huge cover thing in CNN or a huge paper right away. That's not how it works, in the same way that music works and all kinds of things. So there's so many smaller publications, and you can start with them, and then when you contact up the food chain, you say, we got this great feature last month in this place, and because the media they feed off each other. Like they don't. If you're trying to get something in Rolling Stone, it's not like Rolling Stone has some pipeline to all the hot stuff that they look at a bunch of other publications and they read much smaller publications and basically steal that shit. So that's how it works. But that doesn't mean that they're necessarily thieves. That's kind of how the world works. They'll do their own article and they'll talk about it in a different way, but you just don't start at the top. And I know this is all kind of common sense, but I think a lot of times you have to keep reminding yourself of that. And then the other final thing is, the second final thing, is it's okay to do your own PR. You don't need a publicist. You can do it on your own. Like, you can kind of look, if you know someone who's done it before, say, hey, can you send me that press release that company sent out for you, and kind of see how press releases are generally formatted and how they look, and kind of take your own shot at it. Because when you're starting out, you need to conserve your funds. You need to, especially when you're starting out, you have to say, I have X amount of dollars. Actually, I don't even have X amount of dollars, but I hope in 6 months I'll at least have a little bit. How do I want to allocate that? Do I want to allocate that to PR for a bunch of publications that if I kind of am a little bit smart and organized, I can actually do on my own? Or do I want to pay someone X number a month to do it? So doing PR on your own also allows you that when you do get to the point where you're hiring someone, if they're screwing up. You can be like, why didn't you do that? Or like, I know that person, why didn't you, you should have contacted them gently, of course, if you want to work with them and have a good relationship. But that is, I think, one misconception, is that you always have to hire a publicist, because I think a lot of times you can do it on your own. And especially when you're starting out. And actually, it's actually good for you if you do. And you'll make some mistakes along the line, and that's okay too, because honestly, the stakes are lower if it's a smaller publication or outlet or radio station. So that's kind of my perspective on a bunch of random stuff. I mean, what else can I tell you? Yeah.
About your books. So I know that the first one you self-published, and then you went to a publishing company for the second, and then self-published the third.
Yep.
I'm interested in hearing what that process was like working with the publishing company, and sort of how you got there, and then also why you chose to go back to self-publish the third one.
So basically, the first one was Rakim Told Me. This came out in 2005. The weird thing about this book is I actually didn't tell anyone I was doing it. I just waited until they actually arrived, and then I started telling people. I think maybe I thought that was funny or like a big joke or something. But I also wasn't sure if I could do it. Like I wasn't sure because I'd never done that before. I mean, basically what happened with this book is I was writing for Wax Poetics at the time. I don't know if you guys know that publication, but I just called up the editor and I was like, who prints Wax Poetics every month? And like, that looks good. So I guess I'll just call them up and figure that out. And so it was this random company in Montreal. And so I had to deal with half the people there spoke English and half didn't. So I had to brush up on my French from high school a little bit. But so I figured out how to do it along the way. And I had a friend who was a designer, and he helped me out, of course, because I have no design skills whatsoever. So I kind of, and here's the thing, so going way back to what I was saying about opportunities and looking for holes that exist and how you can kind of fill them. So when I put this book out, I didn't try to get it in any bookstores. I wasn't interested. I sold it to record stores because a book in a bookstore is really not a very unique thing. That's not that shocking of a thing to say, but it's kind of true. So I said, on a book in a record store is kind of different. Like there's some, and in some record stores there's none. So if I sell it to, and I had friends who had a music distribution company in Boston called Traffic Entertainment, who I still work with on PR level. So they sold it, and it actually started selling like really well. I mean, it sold on Amazon too. So Amazon was kind of this thing that ran in the background as I was selling it to a bunch of bookstores. But they were getting it all over the place because they would say, oh, by the way, I have this, it's a book, but it's a book about records. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll take 2. And then next week, oh, I'll take 5. And it ended up selling, I think the first run was 2,000, and I ended up selling it. And that to me was kind of amazing because when I put it out, and this also goes back to what I was talking about, like so people who put out their own records, you don't know if it's going to succeed. Like you hope, but I didn't want to print 5,000 or 10,000. I mean, keep in mind, like I still don't actually remember how I scraped the money together to do it. It wasn't easy, and there were definitely some leveraging of credit card limits and things of that nature. So. But what it was is kind of it was a small step in, I think this is a good idea. I would buy this book. And I think that's kind of it, should be at the very core of any idea you have. Would you participate in whatever it is? Would you be a customer? And I was basically like, I would buy this book. Like if my friend wrote it and they were talking to De La Soul and Public Enemy, and like I would buy that in a second. So it ended up kind of extrapolating to like there were like a couple hundred and a couple thousand people who felt that way. So that was the first book. Interestingly, I had just re-upped another 2,000 books, and then Random House called me. I had literary agents in the past that I had kind of did a little bit of work for me, but never really came to anything major. And so I was like, whatever, I'm just going to do this on my own and see what happens. So, but then Random House called me. One of their editors there at this, actually an imprint called Villard, had found the book and was like, this is great, like we'd like to put it out. And I thought that was kind of funny. I was like, really? Like Random House? That kind of surprised me. But this kind of goes back to the ownership, because I could kind of, I could dictate the terms, because I could have said, no, I'm going to do another one. I'd always planned on doing, this book is all 80s records, and then I'd always planned on doing one, the second one was going to be all 90s records. So, but then I started thinking, like, how many times in my life is Random House going to call me and ask me to put out a book, if they could put out a book? Like, that's probably never going to happen again. So yeah, I guess I should do this. And so, because in thinking and to myself saying, I'd never been in a bookstore really. I mean, I guess maybe I was in a couple, but it was mostly record stores and Amazon. So Random House can get me in pretty much every bookstore in the world if they want to. So yeah, sure, like that'll kind of expand my brand and my name and kind of what I'm doing. So the downside of it, and I don't even consider it a negative, but it's something, as I was saying before, like if someone buys into what you're doing and kind of has ownership, like what are you getting back? So what I got back was Random House got that book out into every record bookstore like imaginable, and so that was great. But then my royalty was like much lower. I was going from 100% to something like 10%. But keep in mind, like so the second book, they did the second book. This is Check the Technique Volume 1, that actually, I'll do a little Pac-Man thing. Kind of like half the stuff from this book are in this book. So it kind of cannibalized this one, and then I added the 90s chapters that I had always planned on doing anyway. So, but they had a designer, they had a team of copy editors, I had an editor to work with, so like, that was, there was a value to that, of me kind of, they're here to the scales, you know, so it's like, okay, that's kind of cool, like, so I don't have to, like, I have all these typos in this one, and hopefully they're not going to be in this one, and that's kind of nice, like, when people do stuff like that for you. Of course, very rarely do they do that for free, so that's kind of the price that was paid. So, I didn't have a bad experience with Random House at all. Like, I knew what I was getting into when I first signed the contract. I had a good lawyer, kind of a contract consultant. I didn't go into it blindly, and whatever they put in front of me, I didn't just sign it, like, of course. So I kind of knew what I was getting. And I said, yet again, like, how many times am I going to have this opportunity where I don't have to beg them, you know, oh, please, Random House, you know, like the same thing with, you get a major label deal as an artist, and you think, oh man, everything, this is great. Like, life is just set up in front of me, and wow, my life's going to be amazing. Very rarely does that ever happen. So I also knew that this was like kind of generally a one-time thing, and I could kind of continue the relationship if I wanted to. But when I got back to think, there were about 7 years in between books with the Volume 1 and Volume 2. And in between that time, I just said, I like being in control. I like, so here's one very quick example. If a magazine wants to run like a chapter in my book, whatever it is, Rolling Stone wants to run like a full chapter, like excerpt, they call me and say, we want to do this. And I say to them, that sounds great, but I can't give you that permission, because I don't own that. So you're going to have to contact this person at Random House, and generally they're going to say yes, because what do they care? It's just helping promote the book. But then they send them the contract and the paperwork. With this book, with the first book and the latest book, I say, yeah, that sounds great. I can deal with you directly. So keep in mind, that also means that you have to be organized enough to be able to deal with stuff like that. And whereas it's nice to also, at certain points in your life, be like, yeah, contact this person at Random House. And like, you know, so it's kind of nice to delegate things like that to other people. So yet again, it's kind of a push and pull. But in the end, I decided that I wanted to own 100% of what, because I was like, I've done the kind of, you know, basic kind of book, and I've done the really much better looking thing that is all around the world and people know, and it's sold, I think it's sold up to this point like 12,000, 13,000 copies, which is not bad for a music book. The thing I forgot is how much ridiculous amount of work it is to, it's hard to actually imagine how much of a pain in the ass it is to do an index for a book that's 550 pages long. So every time I mention, Rick Rubin's name, it's like, okay, that's page 11 and 19, and so that was 3 days out of my life that I'll never get back. And when I did it on Random House, they did that for me. So, but in the end, like, I'm glad, because anyone who comes to me and says, I want to do something, I want to run this, or just 2 weeks ago, someone was like, I want to inquire, have you sold the rights yet to documentary for any of your books? And I was like, no, but I own them all, so talk to me. And that's like a good feeling, even though it was a ton of extra work. And this all comes back to decisions that you guys are going to have to make in the next year and in the next 10 or 20 years, is kind of what do you give up? Because sometimes it's nice to have people do stuff for you. It's nice to be able to say, oh, talk to Joe over there and he'll help you. So you just have to figure out. Don't ever give away all of the rights to your work. And I like to figure out different ways along the line to make them prove that they're going to deliver on what they say they're going to deliver. And so always make sure that it's never you have to wait 5 years to see if they screwed you or not. Figure that out in 6 months and have an escape clause in there where if they don't live up to their part of the bargain at 3 months and 6 months and 12 months and et cetera, that you can get out of it, because your ideas and your work and what you produce is very valuable, and it's alluring, and sometimes people will, I think, take advantage of people because they have money and they have extra money, and they say, I bet I can kind of get over them, get over on them a little bit. I mean, I'm sure you guys all watch Shark Tank, so it's like, I see your valuation and I'm gonna cut that in a third, and so I'm always very impressed on Shark Tank with people who are actually just like, no, screw. Like, I believe that this is the valuation, and maybe I'm not going to get it here on the show, but in another year, that valuation is going to come true. That takes a lot of guts to do. So, but you have to, yet again, you have to believe in yourself and believe in your idea. And sometimes it's a 5-year process. I hate to say it, but sometimes it is. But if you believe in it, and if you wake up every day and that's something that drives you, and that's something that excites you every time you think about telling other people about it, then hopefully you can kind of get through it to the point where it does become not only a reality, but a reality that can, help you get things that you never thought you'd have in life. So, but if it doesn't, then at least you had a pretty interesting trip along the way. I hope so. Yes?
I don't want to stop the flow because he's dropping jewels in here. Like, literally, I've been over here taking notes like I'm in a college class, like then and then. And really, so we can have the conversation. Part of what is really neat about this experience and Brian being with us today. First, thank you to Brian. I know I saw more hands, we have more questions. We want to make sure that we honor the